Xbox still wants to beat Sony at hardware. How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation, and this is the weekend update here on the channel. I talk about all the extra news that I couldn't cover throughout the week. So in addition to that, we're going to talk about how Sony's new shakeup plan is working. Then we're going to talk about how Sony just filed a great new trademark. And finally, the next God of War location has been revealed. Let's just get right into this first news story here because it's very interesting to me. So I'm sure you guys saw that Phil Spencer did the interview rounds after the developer direct last week, which had some great games like Ninja Gaiden Black 2, Ninja Gaiden 4. All these games are coming to PlayStation, so it was probably worth watching even as a PlayStation fan and having Xbox branding. I thought there was some cool stuff there, but he's been doing a couple of interviews. He did one with Gamertag Radio, which is Danny Pena and Paris Lilly's podcast. They're celebrating their 20th anniversary, which is cool. And the other one was with Destin Legary. He was at IGN for a long time, but he left his job there and is now trying to be a full-time YouTuber. So congrats to him. Congrats to everyone involved. That's a cool interview to get. But one of the cool questions that really stood out to me is the hard question that needed to be asked. So looking at Xbox going forward, knowing that they're putting all of their games on PlayStation, on PC, hopefully theoretically on Nintendo Switch, why would anyone buy an Xbox over a PlayStation 5 if the key thing is PlayStation's not doing the same thing? They're not putting their exclusive games on Xbox. I know people always point to Death Stranding, but that was not a full first party game by Sony. It was a second party game, third party game. It was a 2.5 party game where they funded a little bit of the development. They didn't buy the IP, so it's not Sony publishing that game on Xbox. Hideo Kojima's company, Kojima Productions, owns the rights to the IP. They own the entire game. So them putting it on Xbox a couple of years after it came out, not really Sony putting their games on other platforms. The only real example we have of a first party game from Sony coming to another platform is Horizon Lego Adventures, which does not matter. I'm sorry. Like, people bring that up as like some gotcha. It's a Lego game and it's like the weakest IP Sony has at this point. So I really couldn't care less. So those two games excluded, they're not putting their games on Xbox. So when you go to the store and you see an Xbox and you see a PlayStation, and the PlayStation allows you to play all the PlayStation games and all the Xbox games, but the Xbox only allows you to play the Xbox games, there's no reason to buy the Xbox. And Phil Spencer has been asked this a lot over the past few months, and he always has a little bit of a wishy-washy answer, but this time around he was a little bit more direct. And just to be clear, this one's coming from the Gamertag Radio interview. Go check it out. It was worth watching. He said, "I want people to pick hardware based on the capabilities of that hardware and how that fits into the choices that they want to make about where they want to play, and we want our hardware to win based on the hardware capabilities that we have." So essentially what he's saying there is that he wants the hardware to be better than what Sony has, and that be the driving factor as to why people would buy that console over the PlayStation 5 or 6. And as we saw in this generation, we heard this from everybody on the Xbox side of the fence. Oh, the Xbox Series X is 30% more power than the PlayStation 5. And when you go to the store, what are people choosing to buy? The PlayStation 5. So basically he just reiterated what they're already doing, and I don't think that's going to work. I think there's a small hardcore group of Xbox fans where even if the console was worse and had less features, like it didn't have, I don't know, what is that, smart quick resume? Like it didn't have quick resume or play anywhere where you could play your games on PC and Xbox and transfer your saves and anything like that. They would just buy the console anyway. And I feel like that's the audience you're capturing regardless. So I really don't see why Xbox is continuing to make hardware outside of making it for their hardest core of hardcore fans. They did get into other topics though between the two interviews that were interesting, like the next Xbox having access to Steam. That would be kind of enticing for me personally, because my two biggest libraries are on PlayStation and Steam. I think I have more games on Steam just because digital game downloads started a lot earlier on Steam because it's always been digital. I got my first PC when I was in like junior year of high school, and Sony didn't start allowing you to download PS3 games digitally until I was like well into college. So Steam had a big head start. They also do way better sales than PlayStation does. So over the years, just having more time to do it, I have collected more more games on Steam, but it is pretty close. So being able to take advantage of those games on Steam, not having to double dip on PlayStation to play them, that would be kind of enticing to own an Xbox. But as someone who already owns a PC, I don't need another device that can play Steam games. I have a PC, I have a Steam Deck, I'm good there. So yeah, the most enticing aspect of that is kind of an out for me, but it is interesting. This all goes back to what I talked about earlier in the week, where developers are kind of crossing their fingers that PlayStation does the same thing as Xbox and puts their games on other platforms. I just don't think the key to the solution here is to put your game on every platform out there. Like, we're seeing this play out with Square Enix, where people don't show up for their games on PlayStation, so they're going to start putting them on Xbox and Nintendo Switch. I don't think the problem is lack of availability. I think the problem is making games that don't resonate with your audience. And it's not like it's free to port your games over to Xbox or free to port your games over to Switch. If you're not making games that resonate with the people playing games, you're not going to sell them no matter what platforms they're on. I mean, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a good example that it sold decent on Steam, it sold decent on PlayStation, but I'd say it's comparable. It's not like once it came to PC, the sales just exploded and totally blew off the charts or anything. It did okay. Like, it did great for Square Enix because their games have been disasters on PC, but it wasn't like a monumental success or anything like that. So clearly the problem there lies in the fact that they split one PS1 game into 3 full $70 releases. I think that's what they should be looking at. And I think the same thing goes for everything else, right? Like, Xbox putting their games on other platforms, I'd assume that Indiana Jones will sell decent on PS5, but it'll probably sell a little bit better than it did on Xbox, but not much. It's not like the audiences are all that different. So yeah, I like the strategy, I guess, from the perspective of being able to play your games on different platforms, but I care more about the quality of the games at the end of the day versus the hardware that I'm playing on. And Sony, even when they had difficult to work with hardware like the PlayStation 3, they still had better games than Xbox. And that's why I chose the PlayStation 3 that generation, so I could play games like Uncharted, Infamous, and Resistance, because they were just awesome games. So the problem to me is not having your games on every platform out there. I don't think that's a good strategy. I think having good games on whatever platform you want to have them on is the winning strategy. And if you make good games, they'll sell well. And I guess if you have good games on every platform, they'll sell well. But the core here, the key point I'm making, is that the focus should be on quality of games, not quality of hardware. The hardware should just work, of course, but like, if you put too much focus on hardware, the games will suffer, and no one wants to buy hardware if there's no games to play. Anyway, that brings us to the second news story here, which is that Sony's new strategy for their whole shakeup with the CEOs, it seems to be working. So I was curious how this would play out, because by not demoting, but promoting one CEO and leaving the other one exactly where they're at and kind of stripping him of the title of CEO, that's kind of admitting fault, right? Like, if you're a shareholder of Sony, like you have stock in Sony, and you see a move like that where they shake up their whole CEO strategy after only 6 months, I don't see how you could look at that and not say that's them admitting fault on one side of the fence, which is games, right? Like the Concord disaster and everything like that, and just canceling the Bluepoint and Ben Studio games. You can look at that situation and say, well, that's them admitting fault. But it doesn't really seem to have worked out that way, because their stock has reached the highest point it's ever reached ever. I'm like a dabbler in stocks. I don't want to give it financial advice, but video games is just so volatile. It's up and down all the time. Unless you're like a day trader, I really don't see a lot of value in holding game stock. Don't take my word for it. Again, it's not financial advice, but yeah, having Sony's stock reach the highest point ever is good. I'm more interested though in if they can sustain it, because yeah, it's a spike right now, right? Like, they shot up because of the leadership shakeup. The shareholders saw that as a positive sign, so the valuation went up. That makes a lot of sense. But unless they start putting out some actual games and those games start resonating with the hardcore fans and start selling well, I could definitely see that stock dropping just as quick as it shot up. But in the short term, it seems like all these quick moves Sony's been making, like shaking up their CEO strategy, also with the PC thing, making the login requirement not be required so that more people will theoretically buy PC games. I like when Sony's on the back foot like this, because that's when they're consumer friendly. In a perfect world, these game companies would always be consumer friendly, but when they're at the top, that's when they make the moves that really tend to screw people over and take as much of their money as possible. But Sony clearly knows that they were at risk of potentially being in a bad spot. I like to see them correcting early instead of letting things get as bad as they were in the PS3 generation before they actually do anything about it. So yeah, Sony seems like they're in a great spot. This news is all positive, and I think it's only only a win for us PlayStation gamers because it's going to continue resulting in consumer-friendly practices because they got to keep that stock price up, baby. They don't want it to drop because then people start selling and then their value will go down and then everything will be bad. They'll start putting their games on Xbox. Boo. But sticking with Sony's good moves, they just filed a great trademark that I'm very excited to see filed, and that is for Resistance. Now, this is in Europe. They're renewing the trademark for Resistance, and you could look at this one way, which is that if the trademark was about to expire, even if they didn't have plans to make new Resistance, they would still refile that trademark so that, you know, someone else couldn't wait for it to kind of lapse and then make their own game called Resistance. A lot of companies do this because they want to keep the rights to these names in case they ever revive them later. Or you could look at it how I'm looking at it, which is where Sony clearly sees that they have a problem, which is not enough games coming out. So they also said a couple months ago that they want to look at their back catalog and start making new games with those older franchises. Resistance was the one that I said I wanted the most, and renewing the trademark in Europe kind of shows that maybe they're looking at Resistance and hopefully greenlighting a new game in that franchise. Now, there's a few reasons I think that's good. First of all, Resistance is just a great trilogy. The first game, if you have a PS3 and you go back and play it, it's pretty rough, but Resistance 2 was excellent. The story is one of the best Sony stories ever. I thought it was a great first-person shooter. It was one of the first experiences I had with first-person online multiplayer. I thought that was great. Even though Resistance 3 didn't sell well, I thought it was better by almost every metric. Like, the single-player campaign in that game was just so damn good. And I think it really came down to the weird box art as to why it didn't sell. It was just a chimera skull on a red background. It didn't really stand out on the shelf, and it stayed expensive for a long time, so no one really wanted to take a risk on it. Regardless, it's a good franchise to bring back. I think you could do a full creative reboot, get that Insomniac sort of weapon creativity put back into the game. I don't think that would lend itself well to a live service. I think you do what Space Marine 2 did, which is make a throwback shooter where you get an 8 to 10 hour campaign, a full multiplayer suite that's completely unbalanced. You can spend some time playing in like 10 to 12 hours and then move on to the next game. I think that's something people would buy for full price, and there's also an opportunity to make it a live service, I guess, but I don't want to see that. Either way, I'm glad to see these new trademarks being filed. I'd love to see Infamous. I'd love to see some God of War Classic stuff being filed. Dig into that old IP catalog you have, Sony, because for a lot of people like me who have been around as a diehard fan since the PS2 and PS3 generation, there's a lot of franchises they have that would do really well in today's modern world. Like The Getaway, their competitor to GTA, bring that back. That was awesome. And then we're going to keep the great move train going with this fourth news story. We now know the next location that God of War is going to tackle, and it turns out it's Egypt. So this is coming from Daniel RPK, and this is like a merging of my movie channel and my games channel. But basically, if you want to know leaks that are 100% accurate in the movie world, you follow Daniel RPK on Twitter. He's got some inside sources that tell him everything that's going on. He gets access to casting calls, and Sony Santa Monica Studio, as he's reporting, is casting Middle Eastern actors with a focus on Egyptian history. So just reading the tea leaves, kind of looking at the teases that were in God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok, that just stands to reason that God of War Ragnarok 2 or God of War 2018 3, however you want to put it, will probably be tackling Egyptian mythology. And I think that's cool. It'll be a shakeup from the Norse mythology, which was all covered in snow. You can't really get much more of a polar opposite than the deserts of Egypt. And there's so much historical lore to mine there that I feel like it would be sweet to see Kratos ripping his way through the Egyptian mythology landscape. There's tons of stuff they could do. There's tons of Egyptian gods he could beat up and kill and tackle. I hope they kind of go a little bit more masculine than the story worked out to be in God of War Ragnarok. I hope we're out of the dad era, right? Like, yes, we understand that Kratos was violent in the past and he's got to atone for that to become a better father, but he did that in 2 games. So let's move on to Kratos just beating the shit out of gods again. Like do what Gears of War Ide is doing. Go back to the beginning when people are rough and unfocused and really just raw and cool and gory and edgy. Like, that era is coming back in games. And if Santa Monica Studio wants a real big hit success, bring back the violent ass Kratos we had in the first 3 God of War games with the excellent gameplay you developed over God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok. I feel like that's just a slam dunk winning strategy. I am extremely excited about this though. A lot of my favorite franchises are being brought up by Sony now, and we just have to wait and see how long it takes these games to come out. I think they should go for a smaller scope and bring the price down to $60 again. I think people would be really happy about that on 2 fronts, because we'd get games faster. They need to sell less copies to be profitable, well. And, you know, if you're charging $60, that's going to get more people to show up. I know that $10 that they make on the $70 games compounds, but it would be nice to have games be cheap again, like Astrobot was last year. Anyway, guys, that about covers it for this video. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.